Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. We do this every week, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to check out. But before we get started, I do like to go over some new news and discoveries that I just found out about over the past week. I do have a few items to go over. The first one is that there is a new campaign being launched by Steamforged Games, and this is for the campaign for Sea of Thieves Voyage of Legends, and this is a game that's going to be based on the video game with the same name. Looks like this one's going to be competitive, not a whole lot of info out on this one yet, nor is there a release date, so stay tuned for that and I'll give more information as it becomes available. We also have a new Kickstarter announcement for Teotihuacan, the City of Gods, and this is going to be the deluxe master set, so this is going to have all the content plus more, plus it's going to be all deluxeified. So if you are a fan of this game, this one is going to be launching sometime in April, and of course I'll go into that in a lot more detail in the week of its launch next month. We also have a new expansion announced for the game Mindbug, which is a 1v1 card battler designed by Richard Garfield, who created games like Magic the Gathering as well as Keyforge, and I'm really impressed at his ability to iterate on these card battlers and make them more and more accessible with less and less cards, because Magic the Gathering had a whole whack of cards, and then Keyforge offered a unique deck with every pack that you bought, but you only actually needed one deck each in order to play the game. And now we have Mindbug that only requires a single deck and honestly looks like a ton of fun to play, and I think this is the one that I would prefer of the three. I'm not interested in spending a ton of money trying to make a competitive deck in Magic the Gathering. Then I did have some issues with Keyforge. It really is an excellent system, but just some of the games could go on and on forever. I wish it had some sort of mechanism to speed up the game the longer it goes. And when Mindbug originally released last time, it was a game that really impressed me, and I think it was also my pick of the week. And it's a game that I am planning to buy, so if I get it in this campaign or from retail, I'm not quite sure yet. But if you're a fan of card battlers, I really recommend checking this one out. And the last thing I want to mention is that I did miss a campaign in last week's video. It happens sometimes, but this one happened to be for a really big campaign, which was Doomlings Overlush, which is an expansion to the game Doomlings, which is kind of a party game where players are going to be building up their Doomlings by combining different traits, then evolving them over different ages, trying to score the most victory points before their planets explode. And I always do like to give a quick shout out to Alex over at Board Game Co. I do these videos every single week, but he does one at the start of each month, going over the entire month and letting you know of all the games that he knows about at that time. So if you want to get a little bit of a sneak peek of what's to come, definitely subscribe to his channel, and I have a link to that in the description below. And another really cool thing that's going on with Alex is that he's actually hosting a board game retreat in July, and this is going to be hosted in Connecticut, and I will be attending that as well. So if you want to hang out with us, or you just want to whoop me in some board games, I'm always happy to play with some of the viewers that I'm able to meet up with. Tickets for this are up for sale now if you're interested. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. I've already booked my flight and my hotel, so I am locked and loaded. So if you are heading out, feel free to reach out to me. The best way is to just PM me on my Discord, which I'll have a link to in the description below as well. And if you enjoy these monthly or weekly roundups, I just also wanted to mention that there is a YouTuber that also does a monthly roundup of upcoming war games. And then I guess we shouldn't forget retail games, even though they lack any deluxeified components, come at a reasonable price and fit on a single shelf. Gross. You can subscribe to Grant Lyon, who puts out a video every single month letting you know of the games coming to retail. And I'll leave a link to those channels in the description below as well, but that's all we have for an intro, and we do have quite a lot of games this week, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on March 19th, and this one's called Tolerance, and this plays 3 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play, and this is a really interesting trick-taking game that takes place back in medieval times. This is a game that has rival churches. You have the Catholics and then you have the Protestants, and players will be playing different cards into a trick following your normal trick-taking rules, where the suit played is going to be the suit that players have to follow if they're able to, then the highest suit matching that color is going to win the trick. But this game also includes a really interesting twist, because after that trick is completed, you're going to be arranging those cards from lowest to highest and then resolving the effects of each card. And the cards can do different things like gain the player's money, convert cards into other types of cards, kill other cards in the trick, or even cause effects later at the end of the round for the player that was able to win that trick, which is the case for any of the royalty cards. And whenever a player wins a trick, they're going to be putting their Catholic cards on one side of their player board and then the Protestant cards on the other. But I did mention that some cards could be killed, so if that's the case, you're still going to be putting them on the same side, but you're going to be putting them at the bottom of your player board in the deceased section. The end of the round is triggered after players have played all 12 of their cards. Then you're going to be gaining money for each of your living cards of a preferred type, because there's going to be a preferred type of religion for each round. You'll be able to spend that money for different effects or keep it in order to reach different thresholds in order to gain victory points. You'll also gain victory points for each of the deceased cards of the non-preferred religion of that round, but then for any of your living cards, you're going to be gaining points towards that specific religion. Some cards you'll be collecting could also have different guild icons, and this has a bit of a set collection element where you're going to be gaining points for having the most of those guilds. And the game continues like this over a series of rounds, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And as always, if you're interested, I have links down below. And launching on March 21st, we have Galactic Renaissance. This plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 90 minutes to play. And this is a competitive game that if you are a fan of Inish, I think you'll want to check out, because a lot of people are calling this one Inish in space. This is a bit of an area control and a tiny bit of deck building, but there's no actual combat in this game. Instead, you'll be messing with your opponents in more political ways. And the way this game works is that each player is going to have their own player board, which represents their home planet. You're going to have a whole bunch of units on that board that represent emissaries, as well as a bunch of buildings that you'll be able to deploy out into the solar system in order to gain more presence. Every player is going to be starting out with the same number of action cards, and on your turn you'll be able to play as many of those that you're able, because some of these cards will chain into other cards, allowing you to play more cards after them. And these cards could allow you to do different things, like place out portals to make traversing space a little bit easier, allow you to send out those workers or buildings, and when you do send out a building, for each building that you remove from your player board, you're actually going to be expanding your hand size by 1, allowing you to draw more cards into your hand on a following round. There's also a card that will allow you to add more action cards into your hand, but then there's also a card that allows you to take a planet-specific action card if you are the player that has the most presence there. But like I said, this is an area control, and where this game gets really interesting is that each of the planets only has a limited number of spaces for players to place their units on, and if the number of units on that planet ever exceeds those number of spaces, then that planet is going to fall into disorder, and then each player is going to have to make the decision to either lose one of their units permanently for the rest of the game, or to just move 2 of their units to another planet. Of course, just losing one will allow you to maintain more presence on that planet, and also moving multiple units to other planets could have a cascading effect where then those planets get thrown into disorder. But there are some other options here, like taking back one of your buildings instead of one of your units, which of course would reduce your hand size by 1, or if you have a disorder card, you could choose to play that, which will allow you to avoid most of those consequences. Another really interesting point in this game is the scoring, because there's a few different ways you could win. You could either just win by hitting a certain threshold of points, or you could win by being at least 12 points ahead of all the other players, or you could win just by scoring 10 points in a single turn. The first player to fulfill any of those options wins the game, and of course you can find more info and a link to this campaign in the description below. Also launching on March 21st, we have Gem Blenders, the card game, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 20 to 40 minutes to play, and this is a competitive card battler where each player starts the game with 25 health. Each player also starts the game with their own deck of gem cards, and also within this deck are some action cards, as well as gem blend cards that you'll be able to use to upgrade your heroes, because each player is going to be starting the game with 4 different heroes, and these heroes will all have different abilities as well as different stats such as attack and defense, but you can never actually kill an opponent's hero. Instead, when you deal damage, you're just taking health away from that opponent's pool of health points. Players start the game with a hand of cards, but then you'll also be able to draw 1 more card into your hand every single turn, and optionally on your turn you'll be able to equip one of your gem cards to one of your heroes by sliding that gem card behind that hero, and then you'll be able to activate any of the effects on your different hero cards, play any action cards that you have in your hand, and attack the other player by comparing your attack and defense stats along with any modifiers. But the reason that you're stacking these gem cards behind your heroes is because you're trying to create different combinations to fulfill any of the gem blend cards that you might have in your hand. And whenever you have enough gems behind one of your heroes to match the required gems for a blend card, you'll actually be able to replace that hero with your gem blend card, upgrading that hero into a new form. These will give you some different stats and abilities that could help you with your strategy, but if you decide to change your mind, you can always undo a gem blend card and revert back to your hero's normal form. The game continues like this until there's only 1 player standing, and that player wins the game. Also launching on March 21st, we have Forge, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 90 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a competitive Euro game where players will be collecting different resources, combining those resources along with different tools in order to forge them into different items to complete different objective cards and score victory points. You'll also be scoring all sorts of victory points throughout the game, and of course the winning player at the end of the game will be the one who has scored the most. Each player has their own personal player board where you're going to be keeping your 4 workers that you can upgrade throughout the game. But then you're also going to have a special blacksmith worker that is a little bit stronger than your regular workers. You're also going to be tracking which tools that you've unlocked throughout the game, as well as the different abilities that they will grant you. And each round, players will be taking turns putting the workers out onto the main board, and there's a few different action spots that you can choose from, but most of them will have a limit of how many workers can exist on that space. So as you put your workers out, some of these spaces will get filled up, limiting the other players' options. The top row of actions allows players to take a number of resources of that specific type, or if you put your blacksmith token there, you'll actually be able to take the highest available space +1. But then there's also the trading post where you can buy or sell different items and resources, or the plaza where you can pay to move your blacksmith to another action spot. The guilds, which will gain you a guild card which comes with a special benefit or ability, as well as some different icons that you'll be using for set collection throughout the game for some additional victory points. And then at the bottom of the board, there's a development action which will allow you to gain an ability card. Then there's the equipment action where you can gain different permanent abilities by unlocking different equipment, and these equipment may be required for completing different contract cards. The training location allows you to gain a card that you're going to be assigning specifically to one of your workers, and that's going to give your worker a special ability every time you use it. And then finally, of course, there are the different contract cards, and to complete these cards, you're going to be trying to fulfill the number of resources that they display, then take a forge action in order to complete that item. Like I said, you might also need some special equipment in order to complete these cards, but of course, this is the main way to gain victory points. But another great way to earn victory points is by completing the different achievements, and there's 7 achievements in the game, but the maximum that a player can complete is 5, and as soon as a single player completes 5 of those achievements, that's going to be triggering the end of the game. And each of these is a little bit of a race because the first player to complete an achievement is going to be gaining the most victory points for completing that achievement. And once the end of the game is triggered, players are going to be adding up all of their victory points, and the player with the most wins the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, you can check it out in the description below. And also launching on the 21st, we have Let's Go to Japan, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play, and this one is my own personal pick of the week. And the reason I'm picking this one is because it does look like a fun game, but I think it's also offering something that's a very unique experience and puzzle specific to this game. Each player is going to have their own player board as well as some starting money and energy that they're going to be spending for different actions and cards, and the cards in this game represent different activities and experiences that you're going to be having in Japan, and you're going to be assigning those cards to the various days outlined on the bottom of your board. And your plan is to stay in Japan for 7 days, so you're going to be assigning different activities to each of those individual days, trying to have the best experience as possible. But there are some things to note here, because once you commit to an activity on a day, you're not allowed to change your schedule. That activity has to happen on that day, and you can never have more than 3 activities on a given day. And these cards will also take place in either Kyoto or Tokyo, and anytime that a card in one location leads to a card in the other, you're going to have to take some sort of transportation to get there. This could be a positive thing or a negative thing, because there is the more bougie, luxurious trains that you can take that will actually up your happiness and improve your experience. Or there's the regular public transportation that's free to take, but is a lot less enjoyable. But another really interesting aspect of these cards is that each one has a highlight of the day, and this is some sort of objective that you're going to be trying to complete in order to gain more victory points for that specific day. And even though all the cards offer a highlight of the day, the only one that you'll be doing is the one that is on the bottom of that row of cards. I really like this mechanism because it means you're not only concerned with your different activities and the order you complete them, but you're also concerned with which activity is going to be your last one of the day, because that's going to be the one that scores you the most victory points. And once the players have assigned all their cards to their different days on their player board, effectively planning out their entire trip, you're going to be activating each of those cards in sequential order, which will do different things like move experience tokens up your experience track depending on the type of experience that it is, and move you up and down the happiness track depending on how enjoyable or stressful those activities were. And if you want to add a little bit more variety to the game, you can choose to play with the passport cards, which can add player-specific rules or abilities that will change the way that each player plays, incentivizing different things over others. After players have resolved their plan, the player with the most victory points is the winner, and of course, if you're interested in this one, you can find links in the description below. Also launching on March 21st, we have Cursed Goblins, and this plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 10 to 45 minutes to play, and this is a really interesting pocket-sized card battler that uses a push your luck mechanism. And the way that this game works is that each player is going to be playing cards in order to harm the other players, and you can play as many cards as you want on your turn. The only catch is you don't know what cards you have in your hand because you're never allowed to look at it, but you do have some information because you get to see what all the other players have in their hand, and you also get to see what has already been played. The push your luck aspect comes from when you actually play your cards out onto the table, because each of these cards is going to have a damage value on them, and every time you play that card, you're going to be taking that amount of damage. If the total damage from all the cards that you play on a single turn is greater than a certain number, then you are eliminated from the game. But if you're able to stop before that, your cards will be resolved, and then you'll be able to discard as many cards from your hand, drawing up a new hand of cards. You'll then have to give a clue to a player on your left or right to give them a little bit of a hint of what they have in their hand, and then the game continues like this until there's only one player standing, and then that player wins the game. A really simple game here, but I always do love push your luck games, and I think this one implements it really well, and if you think so too, you can find links to this campaign in the description below. Also launching on the 21st, we have Raven Manor, and this plays 4 to 10 players and takes about 15 to 45 minutes to play, and this is a hidden identity deduction game similar to the game Werewolf, but quite a bit darker. Players are going to be dealt role cards at the start of the game, and one of those roles is going to be the Raven. Whichever player is assigned that role is going to be trying to possess or kill all the other players in order to win the game. And of course, the other players are going to be trying to deduce who this player is and trying to kill them before they are themselves killed. Players will also be drawing additional cards into their hand every single turn, and these cards could be different action or reaction cards that grant you abilities, or attack cards that allow you to attack the other players, or even cards that could possibly help you defend yourself or other players that you think are on your team. And some of these cards you can actually play into the middle of the table, giving every single player at the table the opportunity to use that card, which might help you deduce which player is on which side. But then there is also the special feather card, and this is a card that the Raven is trying to get into the other player's hands so that they become possessed and then have to help the Raven. And if the Raven is able to kill or possess all the other players, then the Raven wins the game. But if there's any players left over once the Raven is killed, then those players win instead. And if this one sounds interesting to you, I have links in the description below. Also launching on March 21st, we have Nekojima, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 15 to 30 minutes to play. And Nekojima is actually an island in Japan coined as the Island of Cats. And the reason it's called this is because there's just a ton of cats that roam freely through the island, and the island itself has a lot of narrow streets with a lot of different structures and hanging cables that you'll often find the cats strolling along. But that's not the only thing interesting about this game. This game is also a dexterity game that, for me, completely replaces Jenga because the setup for this one is not nearly as painful, and it involves cats, which just by default makes it a superior game. But in this game, you're going to have a main board that's broken up into 4 different locations, and each turn players are going to be stacking electrical poles between those different locations. And of course, the goal here is to do this without knocking over any of the other structures, and the first player to do that is going to be the one to lose the game. But of course, this game wouldn't be complete without the cats, where players will also be hanging those across the different cables. But if you're not so interested in a competitive version of this game, you can also play it cooperatively, where players are trying to get as far as possible through all the different components. Looks like a really fun game, and if you're looking to add a dexterity game to your collection, you can go ahead and click that Notify Me button, which you can find linked in the description below. Also launching on the 21st, we have Flutter, and this plays 2 to 5 players. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play, and this is a tile laying game all about placing insects in order to pollinate flowers. Players are going to be placing tiles with these different insects into a shared space, and on each of the corners of these tiles will be a flower of a specific color. Players will also be trying to match up the corners of their tiles with the other tiles that they're going to be placing them beside, and doing that will earn you petals of that specific flower. But the goal here is to be the player that completely encircles another tile, and whenever you do that, that's going to allow you to score victory points for that tile. But there is a cost to be able to score those victory points, because once you're able to do this, you also have to pay the number of petals of the appropriate color equal to the number of white circles on that tile Otherwise, you're not able to score those victory points. This means that you'll want to encircle another tile, but you're going to want to do it only when you have the appropriate number of petals in order to score that tile. And that's everything there is to the game, but I think it does a lot with a very simple rule set, and it also has some really nice artwork, so if this one looks interesting to you, you can find links to the campaign in the description below. Also launching on March 21st, we have Dreams of Yesterday, and this plays 1 to 3 players and takes just 20 to 30 minutes to play. And this is a card game where players are trying to accumulate different artifacts in order to build the most prestigious museum. Players are going to be taking turns drafting cards from a shared grid of cards, where in that grid there's always going to be one card missing. This represents the starting space of the player, and on your turn you can move up to 2 cards away from that space in order to take that card into your hand. There's both resource cards and artifact cards, with most of the artifact cards requiring you to discard a number of resources. Each of the cards are also double-sided, and you can spend a resource to do things like flip a card to the other side if there's nothing there that you're interested in, or you could use a resource to also move an additional space. And once you've taken a card, you're going to be drawing a new card from the main deck and then replenishing the space that you started in. You'll be able to look at both sides of that card and decide which side you want face up, and then the next player is going to be starting their turn in the space where you left off. When players take cards and play them into their own tableau, you're going to be making different rows in front of you, and the goal here is to try and make these rows as long as possible, while also matching up as many of the cards' colors with the cards that are adjacent to them. You can only have 2 rows on the go at the same time, but once you close a row off with a special card, that will open up a new row for you to start. But another interesting aspect here is that each of these cards does have a special ability, and you'll be able to use any of those abilities that are on the rightmost side of any of your rows. I think that's a really cool way to do it because it means you'll have different abilities available to you as you're building up your different rows. And the game's going to continue like this, and then players will tally up their score at the end of the game, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. And if you're interested in this one, I have links to the backer kit in the description below. And launching on the 22nd, we have a new addition to the BattleTech franchise, and if you're not familiar with this franchise, it's a pretty big one, and they have card games and RPG, video games, but the main game is their BattleTech Miniatures war game. And this is going to be a new expansion with some upgraded miniatures for that game. And this is a tactical turn-based war game where you're going to be controlling 4 different war mechs, along with additional units if you're using some of the expansions. Players are going to be moving around the map, taking advantage of the different terrain, and using different weapons in order to try and wipe out their opponents. And this game does offer multiple rule sets, and if you want to know why this game is so popular, there's a ton of videos out on YouTube that you can go ahead and check out for yourself. This will be adding even more into the mix as well as additional lore, so if you're a fan of the system or if you want to check it out, I have links in the description below. And launching on March 23rd, we have Unmatched Adventures Tales to Amaze, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 20 to 60 minutes to play. And this is going to be allowing players to play the Unmatched system cooperatively, which is a brand new way to play the game. And if you're not familiar with the Unmatched system, it's a head-to-head fight for dominance as you try to reduce your opponent's health down to 0. But one thing that's really interesting about this game is the wide selection of characters that the game offers. You can play as Medusa, King Arthur, dinosaurs from Jurassic Park, or even Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And what's also interesting about this is that you can actually just mix and match them all together and have wacky combinations where you have Bruce Lee against Little Red Riding Hood. You think I'm joking, but those are actual characters you can play in this game. But each character is going to come with their own deck of cards, and they can also come with multiple supporting characters as well. On a turn, players can take 2 actions from 3 possible actions. They can either choose to draw a card and optionally move their fighters, play a scheme card to perform its card's ability, or play an attack card to attack a valid target in range, and you're going to be resolving its effects, but that will also give your opponent the opportunity to play a defense card if they have one available. Of course, each of these character packs can also come with some different locations, which you can also mix and match across the games, and the first player to reduce their opponent's health down to 0 wins the game. And as I said, Unmatched Adventures is a brand new way to play the game, either cooperatively or solo. And the way that it does this is by introducing enemies into the mix. This first campaign is going to be offering you enemies like Mothman or Martian Invader, and players will be working together trying to defeat these enemies before they either complete their enemy objective or defeat all the players. Enemies will also come with their own deck of action cards, and that's going to determine the actions that they take on their turn, as well as the movements that they make. There's also going to be a bunch of new heroes added into the mix as well, and you can use these heroes in the regular Unmatched game to play competitively, and you can also use all the existing heroes in the Unmatched adventure to fight any of the villains. So these are completely combinable, and if you have the Unmatched system already, you can include all of your content into the Unmatched adventures, as long as you have even just a few of these enemies to fight. And if that sounds interesting to you, I have links in the description below. Also launching on the 23rd, we have Heroes of the Pacific, and this is a 2-player head-to-head tactical war game that takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. In this game, players are either going to be commanding the American or Japanese armed forces, and the basic steps of the game are to choose a scenario which will determine the number of troops that you have, your objective, and the way to set up the main board. Each turn, players are going to be secretly using order tokens in order to command some of their units out on the main board, and those order tokens will also have a value which will determine the order in which they will activate. After this is determined, players are going to be alternating back and forth, activating each of their units to perform either a movement action or an attack action. Once all the commanded units have been activated, players will then alternate back and forth, activating their remaining units. And the game continues like this until one of those players is the first to accomplish their objectives, and then that player will win the game. I only found enough information to just glaze the surface on this one, so if this one does sound interesting to you and you want to know more, definitely check out the campaign, which I have linked in the description below. And launching on the 24th, we have a new addition to the HEXplore series of games, and this one is going to be called Fall of the Ancients. And this plays 1 to 6 players and takes 240 to a long time to play. And the reason for that is that this is a story-driven choose-your-own-adventure campaign game. This aims to emulate your classic RPG role-playing game experience, but without the need of a game master. And this is a game that offers a lot of flexibility when it comes to creating your characters, because each player will be able to choose a role, a race, as well as aspect cards in order to create the character that they want. And the interesting thing here is that you can combine these across the entire HEXplore series. Each player is going to be tracking all of this and more on an erasable whiteboard player board, and then you're going to be playing through the 500-page Choose Your Own Adventure campaign booklet, applying the rules of the HEXplore system, but then playing through each of the chapters, which is going to introduce the lore for this campaign, the different objectives that you're trying to complete for each of the chapters, and how to set up the main board, what scenario cards will be involved, and what events will be triggered at certain points in the game. And in this campaign booklet, you're going to be returning to the Green Flame Forest to stop a goddess from minesweeping the entire region. And if this one sounds interesting to you, I have links in the description below. And those are all the campaigns for this week, but you definitely don't want to leave yet, because we have an awesome giveaway to announce, and this is for a game that I'm super excited for and a lot of people love, which is Townsfolk Tussle. This is going to be for the brand new 2nd edition of the game, and if you're not familiar with this game, this is a cooperative boss battler where players are going to be randomly selecting 4 different bosses, and the types of abilities those bosses have, and the difficulty of those bosses is going to change depending on what order those bosses come out. So you could have one boss show up in the first slot in the first game and be kind of easy to beat, whereas that same boss could show up in its final form in a different game, adding a lot of variety to the game and adding a different experience even if you end up going up against the same bosses. But players will also each be choosing their own asymmetrical characters, and then the game's going to alternate between a town phase and a boss phase, where in the town phase players will be able to buy new gear, and then the boss phase you're going to be going up against those different bosses. Each boss will also have a different set of terrain out on the main board when you go to fight them, which can also be taken advantage of or get in your way depending on how well you play. And what's really cool about this campaign is that it adds a couple expansions that introduce a few new mechanisms as well as new bosses and characters. And one addition to the game is that players will now be able to deploy their own terrain into the boss battle, adding even more variability to those battles. And if the players are able to defeat all the bosses before they themselves get wiped out, then the players will win the game. And not only does this offer some really solid gameplay, but the game also offers some amazing artwork with that classic rubber hose style. And this giveaway is going to be for the spectacular 2nd edition pledge, and this is going to come with the 2nd edition of the game, as well as all unlocked stretch goals. And under this giveaway, you don't have to like, you don't have to subscribe. All you have to do is leave a comment, but not on this video. Instead, I want you to leave a comment on the 2 different content creators that I mentioned at the start of this video. So that was Grant Lyon, who covers retail games every single month, and then there's Zilla Blitz that covers war games every single month. 2 content creators offering something very similar to what I do, do, but in a different area. I'm not going to force you to subscribe to them if you want to enter into the giveaway, but definitely check them out. And if you do like their content and if you're interested in what they're offering, definitely subscribe to them because they're going to be making more of those videos and I'm sure they'll appreciate your support. And I know I'm telling you to go comment on 2 videos, but there's only 1 game, and that's because I'm going to be drawing the comments from one of these videos, but I don't know which one yet. Next week, I'm just going to flip a coin, and whatever the coin tells me to do, that's where I'm going to draw the comments from. You can leave whatever comment you want, but just make sure to put in the hashtag Tussle because there might be other people commenting on their videos, and I want one of you to win. I'll leave a link to both these videos in the description below, and good luck in the giveaway. And the next giveaway we have is for the abstract strategy game Exit Strategy, where each player is trying to get their character to the opposite side of the board first. And whenever you're doing that, you'll be able to move one of your characters or place one of your walls out onto the main board. And the only rule there is that you can't place a wall so that it completely blocks off the movement of a character, but you only have a limited number of walls, so you really want to be strategic when you do decide to place them. And if you're able to, you can jump over the other players, which will help you be more efficient with your movement, so you'll want to be taking advantage of that as well whenever you can. And to enter this giveaway, all you have to do is check out our Discord in the description below, head to the giveaways channel, and just click the emoji underneath that giveaway, and that'll get automatically drawn at the end of next week. And now let's go ahead and draw the winner for last week's giveaway, which was for a pledge for reviving Kathmandu. And to draw a winner, I use this fancy application here. All these extra names down here are bonus entries from my Patreon subscribers. If you like this sort of content, I do have a Patreon down below where you can support the channel. But if you don't want to join the Patreon, you can also just help by liking and subscribing or sharing this content. And we do giveaways every single week. So if you are subscribed and watching these videos and joining in these giveaways just by leaving a comment, that really does give you a solid chance of winning these giveaways in time. But that's just the icing on the cake, and I hope the content alone is worth it. But let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw the winner. And the winner for Kathmandu is Andrew Money, and this is one of our Patreon subscribers, so congratulations Andrew. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for Kathmandu. And that's everything I have for you this week, and I am going to keep this outro brief because it is already after 1 in the morning. But the one thing I want to make sure to mention is that if you are interested in the LevelUp Retreat, definitely go ahead and check that out. I'll have a link to that in the description below. I'll be there, a bunch of other content creators will be there, and a ton of cool people will just be there ready to play board games. So if you like board games and if you like hanging out with people, I do hope to see you there. Tickets are for sale down below, and at this moment I'm not affiliated with it in any way. I'm just going, and I want you to go too. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.
What?